Hello, my name's Winford Dorr, and today I want to talk about one of the most irritating things about golf. Why it is all of our skills aren't absolutely consistent and precise. Well, we know that more coaching helps, we know that practice helps, but sometimes it's not enough. We want a lower handicap, we want to be more natural, and we don't want to go through life always having a weak putt or whatever it is. Up to now, no one has given us the answer. I want to give you an edge. I've been working with leading scientists and others to find answers to how precise skills develop or not. And what came as quite a surprise to me is that there's 3 key elements, and we've only been working with 2 of them. Coaching, number 1. Have to have great coaching. Practice, must do that. It's number 2. But the third is there's varying abilities of the brain to hardwire and perfect different types of skill. No one's been focusing on this because no one has known what to do about it. Well, now we do have a clue about what we can do to transform that. So let's talk about how does the brain do its bit? How does it hardwire all of that practice into a skill that becomes concise, precise, consistent? Well, the first thing it's got to do is get information. For a skill, it needs information from all of our senses. What we see, what we feel, what we hear, and so on. All of our balance. All of those senses go into the creation of skills. So what we see, obviously it's all that surrounds us is what we see, but particularly it's our spatial awareness. What's the angles? What's happening with the lie of the fairway and the green? What's the distances? What direction do we need to be hitting in? Then we've got information from our fingertips, our fine motor controls, particularly important when we're chipping or putting. This fine sensory information has to be precise for us to be good at those particular skills. Then there's our gross motor movements. The coordination of our vestibular, our balance organ, with all of our movements needs to be precise and automatized. All of this is critical information needed by the brain so that subconsciously it gives all of the instructions so that we have a precise, perfect skill. The bit of the brain that works on all of that coordination is the cerebellum. It's the bit here just above the spine between the brain and body, and it coordinates all of the elements of the brain together, and it coordinates different elements of the brain with our different organs and our muscles within our body. And what the cerebellum does, it creates what looks like a computer program. And there's different parts of the cerebellum, and each part of the cerebellum is responsible for different types of skill. So it explains why some are good at some things and others are good at others, but not everyone is good at everything. So it actually sets our character and our personality to an extent. So the cerebellum, when it's trying to create this computer program of perfect steps to create the perfect skill, let me explain to you exactly how it does that. Let's start with the example of a putt. Just to putt, you need lots of visual input, lots of spatial awareness. You need your balance to set up your pose, your stance. You need your fine motor skills, the feelings for your putter. You need your gross motor skills, the movement of your shoulders and your arms and so on. A huge amount of data input, which you don't have to think about, or you shouldn't have to think about, because the brain has turned all of that information and the way it's dealt with into a program that does it automatically, effortlessly and consistently. At least, that's the idea. So as you're developing that, you start with the instruction from the coach, and that's critical. The clearer the coach has been, the clearer in your mind is the picture of what you're trying to achieve. So you start it in your mind, thinking about how you do the putt, and you practice. You try and turn the thoughts that are here in your prefrontal cortex into better and better instructions that become more and more consistent. The more practice you do, the more those thoughts become hardwired instructions. Initially, of course, you're clumsy. You can't do it properly. And sometimes when we're learning, the clumsiness is so bad we can't do it at all. Think about learning to ride a bike. When you're having to think, you cannot ride. You fall off and bruise your knees. And with golf, you just tend to do lots of bad shots and they gradually get better and gradually get better. So what is happening? Well, the cerebellum is creating all of those subconscious connections depending on the reliability of the sensory information that it's being fed. And the more precise that is, the better the skill. But whilst you're learning, or whilst there's any need to think about it, your thinking brain is involved, and here, the thinking processing here in your thinking brain is 100,000 times slower than up in your cortex, where a fully hardwired automatized skill should be taking place. So getting rid of having to think is critical to having good, precise skills. But during that learning process, what's happening is the brain sends two sets of messages whilst you're learning. One to the muscles of your body so that you do the right thing. And the second instruction, exactly the same, it sends to the cerebellum saying, I've just told the body to do this. This is what it looks like. And then you putt, or whatever it is you're doing, and the feedback is compared with the original message. This is what happened. Does it look like what I intended to do? If it doesn't, there are errors. And those errors cause the cerebellum to try and adjust, modify those instructions, tweak them to improve it so that those errors don't carry on happening. And every time you practice, you get two sets of instructions, then you get that feedback message, then you get the comparison, then you get the adjustment in the cerebellum to the skill that is being developed. And that keeps going and going and going. The more coaching you have, the more practice you do, the more that skill is going to improve. And if all goes well, you end up with a perfect, consistent, effortless skill and you're in the zone. But that's of course not real life, because some skills just never become completely consistent. Why? Because the sensory information is not accurate enough. So what is sensory information? We know about our vision, hearing, taste, touch, and so on, all of the senses. But there's loads of them, there's thousands of them. And if they're not integrated properly in the first place, the information coming from them is going to be inconsistent. You've only got to look at the huge variety of the way people walk down the street to realize that the automatic processing that's going on is being managed by the sensory information that varies. So people walk, some of them walk with a fantastic gait, some of them walk with their feet at 10 to 2, some of them swing both arms nicely, some swing one arm. Then you watch people running and they have all sorts of weird, different automatic movements. So every automatic movement that we do, quotes, naturally, is because the sensory information varies from person to person. We need to understand that the sensory information is actually critical, every little bit of it. So a while ago I injured one of my toes. I got 10 toes and I injured just one of them on my left foot. But you know what happened? I limped. I was getting a lot of information from everywhere else on both of my feet, and 9 toes, just sensory information just from one toe was imperfect because I'd injured it. And that little tiny bit of sensory information messed up the whole of my walk completely. I was limping for days. So sensory information from every tiny part of our body is critical. It must be perfect, or all of our automatic skills, processes, are messed up. You watch for significant variations in others. Watch as they walk and run, or even if you shake someone's hand. Some shake very confidently and firmly, others shake limply. These are all to do with how their sensory information has been integrated by the cerebellum, and it affects the way all of their skills and behaviours happen going on. It actually gets a little bit worse than that. When we've got imperfections caused by small problems in small and seemingly insignificant sensory parts of our body, it changes everything. And do you know why that's happened? Well, the cerebellum in humans is undeveloped at birth, and all of that development happens as we're crawling and tumbling about and so on. And we do all of that to a different extent. Some don't crawl, some shuffle about on their bottom. So the very process of creating the sensory processing varies from person to person, and as I commented earlier, it causes us to have different characters. But when we try and become a perfect golfer, that's when it shows up in an irritating way and stops our skills becoming consistent and effortless. Because the cerebellum doesn't have any chance to properly integrate imperfect sensory information to create perfect skills. It isn't going to happen. 1 in 4 people, for instance, have poor eye tracking. If you look at a video of how somebody's eyes are moving when they try and track a moving ball, 1 in 4, their eyes are going all over the place. Now, they aren't so aware of that, it's just they're not particularly good at tracking fast-moving balls. In many cases, they're not quite so good as reading effortlessly and comprehending either. That's a whole nother discussion. But eye tracking becomes information that affects all of our vision, all of our spatial awareness. And of course it affects critical elements of our golf game. So those with poor eye tracking often have poor putting, because the spatial awareness, the movement of the club of the putter as they're trying to putt is all affected. The precision is gone. They haven't got the accuracy they need to get the direction right, to get the length right, and so on. So issues like that can cause us to have a glass ceiling in the development of important skills. So it's nothing to do with a coach, it's nothing to do with the amount of practice I've done, it's the brain's ability to pull together the sensory information and create a precise skill. It can't do it because certain elements of the information it's getting is itself not precise. They're limitations, therefore become golf skill limitations. Does it explain why we're not always naturally gifted at the skills we're trying to develop? It actually gets a little bit more complicated, because when skills are not fully developed and perfect, we're having to think about them. We're having to think about them, put a conscious thought element in, because the information from our senses isn't itself precise. So it's not fully learnt. There has to be conscious compensation to help out this subconscious skill that we've been working on developing. Whenever that's happened, you've got things in your thinking brain that shouldn't be there. And don't forget, this is about 100,000 times slower at processing than the subconscious part of our brain. The thinking brain is actually a very precious space. It's where we make decisions, it's where we rationalize things, it's where we remember lists, it's where we control our emotions and control our attention and so on. So it's a busy place. And when this goes into overload, we lose all of the ability to do those things. Our emotional control is out of the window. Our decision making is poor. Our concentration is weak, and we can even become impulsive. And when you're putting, that quiet eye that you need has gone. Is more coaching and practice going to solve that? No. Well, there's all the bad news out of the way. Because there was a breakthrough started in Sheffield University and contributed to by Harvard University and others on how we can reset the integration of all of that sensory information and correct things. Wouldn't it be great if we could get perfect input from all of our senses so we can have consistent skills? So this cerebellum here, it's the root cause. It's only small, only 10% by volume of the brain, but 3/4 of all of the connections are there. It's so important, and every brain is different. So the program of exercises that can deal with this has to be completely personalized as well. So if anybody gives you exercises that's not in keeping with what your particular brain needs, it's probably not going to do the job. So having a personalized program is critical. And having a program that stimulates the very part of the brain, the cerebellum, to get it to work better, to get it to finish off the precision that's needed from the information from each of your senses so that the skills can become perfect. Unless that's happening, it isn't going to help you, but it is possible to do that. And it's possible to do that now in just 10 minutes a day for about 6 months, and it's transformational. It readies the brain for learning. It increases plasticity again at whatever age you are. It even, according to the scientific journal Nature, increases the number of stem cells. So it's doing all of these amazing things to create a reset, to get those sensory inputs accurate so that your skills become natural and consistent. Well, my plea to you is don't go through the rest of your life with limitations. Don't just do more of what has already proved to not solve the problem and address the root cause. Go and find your full natural potential. All the best.